Morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. That has happened in this class too. It is delightful to see you all and be with you all. Happy Thursday. Happy to the end of Bava Kama, which, as we learned in one of the pages, Japim, we read this week, may or may not be the end of the tractate, right? Because Bava Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra are all one uber tractate that got divided up because it's so long. But the rabbis kind of conceive it as one whole, sort of like Shabbat and Eruvim are kind of all one whole of material. But we will still have a chance to celebrate at our Siyum, which is coming up, I believe, I will double check this, I believe on the leap day of this month on February 29th.
That's what I have blocked it off on my calendar.
And secular leaper. Excellent. We're joined this morning, I'm Rachel Scheinerman. It's nice to see you all. We're joined this morning by Dr. Aronis. Go ahead, let's get started.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I see a lot of folks welcoming, saying hello from what sounds like very sunny places. It is extremely gray here, but hopefully some robust Talmud study will brighten everyone's day. So what a week we have had. This has been a week where I felt some degree of whiplash from the rapid change from topic to topic. So just to highlight some of the things that we've addressed. Do you have to pay for something where you've enhanced the value more than they asked you to? Can you betroth a woman with a loan? Then we started talking about professional malpractice, right? So if a butcher slaughters an animal improperly, or a miller doesn't mill the grain correctly, a money assessor who assesses incorrectly, right? In what ways are people liable for professional malpractice? As the daughter of an optometrist, I was fascinated by this brief discussion about whether benefit can be visual, right? The addition of light or color as ways to think about sensory benefit. Then we had a discussion about whether the sanctity of the sabbatical year takes effect with items that are used in different ways. Then, as Dr. Scheinerman has already noted, we had this fascinating self-referential moment to Bava Kama, followed by a discussion of whether the Mishnah should be read in a chronological order as it comes to disagreement, and then that great discussion of whether the three Bavas are one tractate or three. And I want to remind us that some of that is actually a question of how do we react to new technologies. So when we start writing things down and then book into books, and books have to be sewn together, some degree of the question of how long a book can be is how strong are the needles that go through a set of pages? And so really thinking there about part of what's going on in that discussion is how do we conceive of literature, of a corpus, in a world where the technologies of producing books are changing? From there, we went on to talk about what do you do when the agents of sale go rogue, but they go rogue in a way that theoretically benefits you. Then we talked about what happens if the head of a household consecrates everything to the temple. And what does that mean for the other people in his household who may actually want, like, I don't know, shoes and clothing to wear? I don't know. Then we talked about, can you purchase somebody a field in someone else's name who isn't involved in the transaction? We shifted from that to one who robs someone else and makes a false oath about it. How does he repay them? And can you repay it to an agent? And how do you properly repay a debt at all? And at this point, I'm going to just note that I've gotten some emails from our readers, and I've seen on the Facebook discussions, a lot of folks saying that this is kind of a slog, and that it's hard to keep the same level of excitement and engagement as we continue on in our discussion of the details of property disputes. So I want to just share, right? Like, first of all, yeah, we've done a lot, and it's hard to keep track of. And if you're feeling like it's a slog, I want you to know you're not alone. Other people in this Zoom room feel the same way. Now, what I'd like to do in the 25 minutes that we have with each other right now is look at the text that first of all, it just offers us some fascinating ideas, but also a really helpful reminder about why we're doing this at all. So I've put a link in the chat, and I'm going to be honest, Dr. Scheinerman and I did not check to make sure that you all can get in. So can someone just thumbs up that you can open it? Thank you. Thank you. The folks whose thumbs are up, I see you and I appreciate you. I'm also going to share my screen so that everybody can see it. How do I do that in a way that you don't see my tax returns is the question. Here we go. And apologies if you hear the dog. She is extremely excited to get today's mail. Okay, so here is this set of text that I want us to be thinking about. And then we'll take a step back and talk about like how actually this is, I think, a really profound reminder of why any of this matters. So I'll just jump in. This translation is adapted from Safaria. And just as a reminder, when I'm sharing screen, I can't see the chat. So Dr. Scheinerman, if you see comments in the chat that I should know about, just unmute and interrupt me. All right, a certain animal slaughtered not in the neck that was brought before Rav, right? So we're talking about anytime, right, a sentence starts with a certain X was brought before, it's a description of a court case. So somebody is bringing an animal to Rav, right? So presumably what we're imagining here is the owner of the animal has taken the animal to the butcher to get the animal slaughtered. The butcher has slaughtered the animal in a way which is not how it should be slaughtered, right? If this is an animal that should be slaughtered in the neck and they have killed it in some other way. So the owner brings the animal to Rav to say, like, look here at this animal. What is it? Kosher? Can I eat it? What do I do? Rav declares it non-kosher and exempts the butcher from paying its value, right? So here we're in that discussion of professional malpractice, right? Rav says the animal isn't kosher, and even though the animal was ruined by the butcher, he's not liable for paying for the ruin. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi encountered that man, right? So the guy's leaving the courtroom, he's leaving Rav's room, and he says, okay, and they say to him, and they see him, and apparently they know about the situation, and they say to him, Rav did two for you. Rav did two things for you. Now, the Talmud was going to ask the obvious question, which is, what are the two things, right, that Rav has done that Rav Kahana and Rav Asi are noting? So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. If we say that it's two unfavorable rulings, Rav did two things that, right, Rav ruled in two ways that disadvantage you, right? What are they? He should have declared it kosher, right? Because there's a minority opinion by Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that this works. And instead, he followed the majority opinion of the rabbis that it's non-kosher, right? So the first thing is he had the option of declaring it kosher and didn't, and that seems to be a disadvantage to the owner of the animal. And the second unfavorable thing that he did is that even if he thinks that the butcher, that the animal is non-kosher, he should have ruled that the butcher is liable. The butcher is the one who ruined the animal. So that is the, those are the two unfavorable things. So at this point, what we're imagining, just to take a step back, is Rav, right, some guy goes to Rav for a ruling. Rav makes a ruling. The guy's like, okay, he walks out of, I don't know if it's the courtroom, a home office. I don't know what we're imagining as the ruling space. He walks out of the ruling space and he sees these two rabbis who say to him so far, wow, Rav really disadvantaged you. He could have ruled so much better in your favor, but instead he made these two choices that really make things hard for you. Right, so that's sort of where we are in our imagining of the situation. Now the Talmud is going to say, is that really what happened? Is it permitted for them to say this kind of statement? Isn't it taught that when a judge leaves the courthouse, right? And here we're imagining a world where judges rule in panels of three, right? So this quote, which is from an earlier tradition, is discussing rulings where a panel of judges have ruled. Isn't it taught that when a judge leaves the courthouse, he should not say, I found you innocent, and my colleagues found you liable, but what can I do since they outnumber me, right? If the court has issued a ruling, you are liable, then the individual, right, the rabbis don't actually think you can write a powerful dissent opinion. That if the majority votes in a certain way, everyone has to leave the deliberation chambers unanimously saying, yeah, that was what our ruling was. And it is concerning this that it is stated, he that goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter, right? So it couldn't, right? So they say maybe the two things that they mentioned were unfavorable things. And they say, but they would never do that because you're not allowed to, you know, here are the other two judges that maybe were in the room and they can't go out and say like, no, he got it wrong. We can question whether or not that particular teaching really aligns with this situation. But for the Talmud's editors, the important it's an important discussion partner. So rather, they say, no, they couldn't have possibly said, oh, wow, he, did two unfavorable things for you. Rather, they said he did two favorable things. One, that he did not allow you to eat an item about which there is uncertainty about whether or not it is forbidden. Wow, he saved you from eating something which is disputed as to whether or not it is acceptable. And two, he prevented you from uncertainty as to robbery. If he had found the butcher responsible and gave to pay you for the animal, and it turned out that that was not actually the right ruling, then you have taken money from the butcher that you are not authorized to take, and that's theft. So he has saved you from the potential of theft. So let's stop there and just get some folks' impressions. What are we thinking so far about our story? As I
Would you
tell
like
my
to ask a more specific question? We don't have a response yet, though we do have a hand.
Susan's hand is up.
Okay. Let me find you.
There, I have asked Susan. I think I've asked you to unmute.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. Thank you. Yes, I could. Okay, I'm judging it like a 21st century person, of course. I could see that. Okay, I can go along with the idea of him not allowing the man to eat the flesh of the animal because it's ruled to be non-kosher. But I just don't go along with the man not being compensated for the loss of an animal who could be slaughtered in a kosher way. So I feel like he lost twice.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion.
Yes, and I think here, Susan, part of what you're pointing out is a comment that Daniel has noted in the chat, which is that the slaughtered animal still has value, right? Which is to say, you could do a lot of things with an animal that is not slaughtered correctly. You could sell the entire animal or the meat to non-Jews, right? The kosher laws are laws that are incumbent on Jews, but the rabbis know that they're not incumbent on non-Jews, and so you could sell it to a non-Jew. You can still use the skin, right? We're talking about a time period when the entire animal was used, so you can still sell the skin to a leather maker, use the bones to do various things that you do with bones around glue. We're somewhat distanced, I think, most of us, from the production of the animal, but it's not a zero-sum loss. It's a loss of the difference and that's a really important, right? So he's definitely losing money, but he's not losing the cost of the animal. He's losing the difference between selling non-kosher meat and kosher meat, which, as anyone who ever walks into a grocery store that sells both kosher and non-kosher meat, there is a real price difference there for all kinds of reasons, but it's not $10,000 versus zero. Okay. Yes. Great point, though. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Now, Chaim notes that he's trying to make him feel better and see it in a positive light. Yeah. Right. I mean, this is the ruling. You're not going back and changing the ruling. So why make somebody feel bad about the situation they're already in? But then, Lynn, I see you note like, well, yeah, we want to make him feel good, but there's a bigger structural issue here we want to be thinking about, right? And I lost it because somebody else commented. Where is Lynn's comment? Right. So Lynn writes, is it more important to cover your colleague's back than to make amends for a wrong ruling? And this relates to professional malpractice today. We have to be careful how we tell a patient a colleague is wrong, but we also can't knowingly allow a patient to be exposed to suboptimal treatment and potential harm, right? How do we balance like in America, for those of you who are in the United States, right, the sort of litigious nature of America in whatever ways that means, and a commitment to doing the right thing. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other first impressions about this story? And I'm kind of leaving it vague on purpose. So I really just, before we sort of dig in, what are your first impressions? I'm seeing first impressions in the chat that are like, this just doesn't feel right in some way. Leah, I see your hand. Can we get Leah unmuted?
I think the problem is here we're missing background information. Who knows what this person, what sort of an animal the person has brought? We're not told that. We're not told what his intentions were. We're not told anything about him or about the nature of this. For me, when I read it, what? How can they possibly rule that way? That seems patently unfair. The man has lost not only the animal, he has lost his money. It seems to be a double penalty. But what's going on behind the scenes? That, usually there's a wealth of information about something like this, and it seems almost glaringly absent.
Yes. And I will tell you, for those of you who are experiencing a similar sort of take on this story, there is a lot of academic scholarship on these specific kind of court cases, which largely concludes that these might be the actual records from court cases brought before the rabbis, which again, I want to, right? And so if these are
Okay.
records of court cases, you can imagine the stenographer who is literally just jotting down the key details. Yes. Which is also, I'm seeing some folks in the chat say, wait a minute, the whole Talmud is about dissent. How are we, how can you say we can't dissent in public when like literally that's what the Talmud is? And right here, talking specifically about actual court cases where a judge has made a ruling that affects people's lives who've come to them, what that does for, right, once the ruling has been made and enacted, then that's a different that's a different sort of framework. Now, Daniel also notes that there's a risk to the butcher, right? So sure, the butcher doesn't have to pay in this time. But if the butcher is a butcher, then they make their living by butchering. And you do this more than once, and people stop bringing their animals to you. So I do think we want to also just be aware that there is a professional cost, right, to the butcher eventually in this stuff. And I also just want to note Andrew's comment in the chat before we keep reading, right? There's something about when I said, hey, we've had whiplash this week, and then what are your impressions about this story? That like kind of sort of meets up in a funny way, right? That even in this one story, we have so many different things happening. So I want to look at one other piece. And again, it's that same language that suggests that this might be the record of an actual court interaction that a rabbi had. There was a certain woman who presented a dinar to Rabbi Chia to assess its authenticity, right? So, in a world where coins could be clipped or, cheaper, they put in a cheaper metal, right? When coins were really about weight, think back to the gold standard, those of you who learned about that in social studies. He said to her, it's a proper coin. Yeah, this is a legitimate dinar. So she goes to do her shopping with her dinar. The next day she came before him and said to him, I presented it and they told me that it is bad and I'm not able to spend it. Ooh, lost the page. Right, I was not able to spend it. You told me it was okay. I went to the store. I had a cart full of groceries. I gave it to the cashier and the cashier was like, this is completely counterfeit. You can't use it here. He said to Rav, right? So Rabbi Chia says to Rav, go exchange it for her. So take a good dinar from us and give her the good dinar and take the bad one. And write on my tablet, right? So write in my records. And I think here we're getting a sense actually of, they didn't quite have double column accounting yet, but we're getting a sense of records of this kind of interaction. And write on my tablet, this was a bad transaction. Yeah, I got it wrong. And the Talmud is going to conclude that Rabbi Chia acted beyond the letter of the law. He didn't actually have to do that as the judge, spend his own money to make it right. But he did because he was committed to something. So what's our impression of this story? And again, I know I'm leaving it vague because I want to see what our impressions are. Lynn notes Rabbi Chia was opening the door for a big scam. Absolutely, right? And I think part of what we see here is when we're just getting these records, we actually don't get the motivations of the plaintiffs. And there, I think it's, and they largely, there's a couple of court cases I can think of where we do, but mostly we don't. And because that's actually not usually what the rabbis care about. The question of intention isn't super relevant to some of these cases. There's a wonderful book by Shana Strach-Schick called Intention in the Talmud, which discusses exactly that. And I'll put her name in the chat. This is Jay Fink notes that, some kind of qualified immunity. And then I'm seeing Susan and Laura note that actually he's being really kind, right? That he has made an error, and he has made an error that we can imagine led her to not be able to buy the things that she was intending to buy. And we could also imagine a world where, like, the grocery store calls you out on giving them a bad check, right? Like so there's also a degree of shame there. Absolutely, Susan, right? I think that's right. Think about that. And so he does this sort of transaction piece with her. And Saul asks, what halacha are we deciding here? And that's a great question, but I think part of the question, and the Talmud is going to continue to discuss money assessing, right? This is part of a broader discussion. You'll notice the 3 dots that I have put in. I only pulled out the actual court cases. The 3 dots are a discussion of the halachot of money assessing and how we trust a money assessor. But I think what we also see is that he's just doing something really nice. The Talmud says he didn't have to do it, and he is. Other impressions we want to share? Anything else? Charna, I love your conclusion, right? Which is be a mensch, right? Like, sometimes do the thing that is more than you are expected to do beyond the letter of the law, because this woman, like, maybe just needs groceries. Or maybe she's actually super wealthy, but you got it wrong and you want to take some responsibility for them. So when I see these two, Aaron, that's a really good point, right? It's also more than nice because it protects his reputation for justice. And here I want to note that justice and the law are not always the same, right? That what the law says is that he does not have to do this. But for maybe his commitment to justice, this is, a bigger beyond the letter of the law. Now I'm going to stop share so I can see you all again. And I want to sort of note here, one of the things that really strikes me about these stories, and actually about both of these stories. So I see a lot of folks in the chat trying to see these stories as contrasts. And I just want to note that in the Talmud, they don't come right after each other. There is a discussion in the middle. I've pulled them out for us. But whenever we see, as you keep reading, a certain man did X, a certain woman did X, they ascertain that language in English, or hahu in the Aramaic/Hebrew, that's usually the record of a court case. So they're not meant, I don't think they're meant to be 2 sides of a coin, but I actually think there's something going on in both of them that is the same, which is that we're talking about a world where what strikes me is just how present the judges and the judging panel are to the people, right? The idea that he's in the shopping mall, right? If she's at the market, he's there too, right? Helping with the money exchange. Or in the first case, the man with the animal runs into 2 of the people on the judging panel, just like outside the room, right? And then they go back and talk. And I think part of what we're getting in these stories, as I see it, is there's a lot more closeness between the judges and the people that they are judging, both in terms of proximity and, from a geographic perspective, and from the perspective of human interaction, right? And I think, why would you not be allowed to tell people, oh, I think the other judge got it wrong. Well, if you guys live in the same community and you all pray together and you run into each other in the market, then there's a whole other question about how do you actually live in a world where the rulings that you make are the rulings you make for your neighbors? And what does it mean then when the judges who judge you are the same people who may at some point come over and borrow a cup of sugar or need a spark because their fire went out? And I think part of what we're seeing here, and this is very different from our legal system today, but sort of really evocative to me, is what does judging look like when we are a much more closely networked community? And I want to note here, Michael in the chat has said, doesn't the Torah say not to judge impartially and not to lean to the rich or the poor? Absolutely. But I think part of what we're saying is that that is hard when you know the people. And also the rabbis are going to put in all these fail-safes. Oh, if you get it wrong, what do we do? Right? Or what do we do that's not required by law, but like might be the right thing to do anyways, because you see these people and you care about them, right? You're not a judge because you're judgy. You're a judge because, right? You're not a rabbi because you like telling people what the halacha is. You're a rabbi or a judge because you care about the law and how people live together in relationship to it. And so to me, when I saw those two stories, I thought these stories basically symbolize so much of what we've been doing so far and what we're going to continue to do, which is, yes, right, going back to that point, 17,000 different halachic legal questions about various issues in animal slaughter and money assessment, all crammed into one little court case that it expects you to know about. But also these real questions about what is the role of judging, of the law in actual people's lives, and how do actual people who are complicated, who may or may not always get along, live together in a world where they have different jobs. And they need all of those jobs for society, right? Whether those jobs are the dyer or the butcher or the judge or the money assessor, or for those of us, who spent time in small towns, you might have one guy who is the judge / money assessor, right? How do we all live together in a way where we all feel good about each other, right? So Robert wrote in the chat, and I actually think this is a lovely place for us to stop, right? The question is not always about law, but need for closeness. And I think here what we could even say is the ways that the law can contribute to closeness and how we have to be thoughtful about applying the law and going beyond the letter of the law sometimes in order to pay attention to communal needs. So I just, we're going to keep doing lots of details and they're going to be powerful, but I don't want us to lose sight of that bigger question, which is how do we live together in a world where sometimes we have disagreements about all kinds of things and we all still live in the same town and the judge is still somebody we see in synagogue every day or every week. And we all want to be doing the right thing and nobody's evil, but sometimes things just get really complicated. And that's really the question that we have throughout this whole tractate and that we're going to see through Baba Metzia and through Baba Batra. And I will stop there and wish you all a wonderful week and a wonderful Shabbat and another wonderful week through the Daf.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ronis. I hesitate to say anything since it's all wrapped up so beautifully, but I just wanted to say that you made me think differently about something I've been thinking about this week as I've traveled through the Daf with all of you, which is I have absorbed the idea that the customer is always right. I feel like a lot of us in the modern West have this idea that the customer is always right. And when there's a bad transaction, like I will pick an example that may or may not be real. If I order a pad to go under my chair for my desk and it arrives and I don't want it anymore for any reason, maybe I just don't like how it looks, right? I fully expect the company to take it back and reimburse me. And it strikes me that and I've been thinking this week about how that's more of a marketing and thing than a justice thing, right? That's more something companies instituted so that they would have more marketing success than because that is necessarily just or equitable. But in this world that you're depicting for us, it's very different when the seller is not some company I've never heard of online, but my neighbor, right? And so then when the transaction goes bad, the idea that the customer is always right maybe doesn't feel nearly as fair. And it's really changed my whole thinking about transactions, commercial transactions, and fairness, and my internal assumptions just based on this world of the customer is always right that I just have embodied for my 20 and 21st century life.
Absolutely.
So, and yes, I don't have a relationship to that unnamed company. So anyway, thank you as always for bringing us interesting texts and interesting thoughts. Thank you to all of you for your really thoughtful comments. I learned a lot from you as well. And it was lovely to be with you all. And I will echo Shabbat Shalom. May you have a good week. And we'll see you in your inbox tomorrow. And we will see you next Thursday on the Zoom. Okay. Bye, everyone.